This presentation documents the worst environmental pollution disaster affecting the U.S. city of Donora, Pennsylvania in late October 1948. In this presentation, I will begin by discussing the purpose and objectives of this work, the background of the smog covering Donora in 1948, its causes and environmental impacts. I will also talk about how this event led to the Clean Air Acts of 1963, 1970, and 1990. I will then discuss some of the long-lasting remaining effects of the smog on the health of Donora residents to date. And lastly, I will briefly discuss the issue of air pollution today as it relates to the case of Donora, ending with a summary take-home message. The goal of this presentation is to describe the air pollution disaster that happened in Donora, Pennsylvania in 1948, its environmental and health impacts on residents, and finally to discuss other long-lasting effects as well as implications and regulations this disaster had led to. Donora is a small industrial town spread out along the Monongahela River about 30 miles south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The citizens of Donora rely heavily on two major industrial plants, the American Steel and Wire Plant and the Donora Zinc Works. At that time, smoke in the air was often considered to be a sign of progress and economic prosperity, whereas clear skies meant economic depression and unemployment. The population was estimated to be around 14,000 residents at the time of the event. So what happened in Donora? Beginning on October 26, 1948, sparse air movement contributed to a temperature inversion in the atmosphere over western Pennsylvania. This resulted in a fog covering all Donora with particulate matters and heavy metals and other contaminants. For a few days, the smog condition didn't appear to be markedly unusual to the residents, so they continued doing what they do. They celebrated Halloween on October 29th. However, next day, on October 30th, the smog has gotten worse. Visibility was extremely poor, locals lost their sense of direction, and physician offices were very busy with worsened condition of respiratory distress and asthma. Because of the darkness, firemen at the time and physicians were going door to door to provide oxygen to Donora residents. At approximately 2 a.m. on Saturday, October 30th, the first death occurred. And within 12 hours, approximately 20 residents of Donora died due to the smog. In total, this suffocating smog continued accumulating and affecting residents for 5 days until it started raining on October 31st. This event inspired the passage of the 1955 Air Pollution Control Act. It also helped forming the Clean Air Act in 1963, 1970, and 1990. Due to the smog event, 20 residents of Donora died. It is also estimated that 5,000 to 7,000 individuals in the town became ill. Of those, 400 required hospitalization, and 4,470 had mild to moderate symptoms of respiratory distress. This totaling nearly to half the working class population of Donora being affected by the smog. This photo shows the large amount of smoke that mills in Donora produced at the time of the event. This event led to the first large-scale epidemiological investigation of an environmental health disaster in the United States in order to understand the causes of the smog and its long-term and short-term impacts. The United States Public Health Service at the time conducted an extensive study that utilized house-to-house surveys, autopsy reviews, veterinary investigation, air pollution monitoring stations, and analyses of weather conditions. The investigation concluded that the Donora smog was caused by a combination of three primary factors. The first major contributing factor was the pollution emitted by the American Steel and Wire Plant and the Donora Zinc Works, followed by the unusual weather system and temperature inversion, and lastly, it was about the unique geography and topography of Donora. The first major contributing factor was the pollution emitted by the American Steel and Wire Plant and the Donora Zinc Works, which covered miles of riverfront ground. These mills produced heavy plumes of smokes in the air on a regular basis. In particular, the zinc works had been identified as a significant polluter because of its emissions of many contaminants and pollutants in the air. This background photo shows that there's 9 out of the 10 spelter stacks of U.S. Steel's Donora Zinc Works. The second major factor identified by the U.S. Public Health Service was an unusual weather system. The smog first settled throughout the town on October 26 and 27 when a temperature inversion occurred. Basically, with cold front moving in air and very little wind, it resulted in cold air being trapped below warmer air in the inversion layer, which in turn acted as a lead over the valley. This figures on the right demonstrates the process of temperature inversion that occurred in Donora during this time, where cold air being trapped below warmer air, allowing for buildup of pollutants and toxins in the air. In the case of Donora, it was hydrogen fluoride, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, multiple sulfur compounds, and heavy metals within fine particulate matter. The U.S. Public Health Service also reported some residential contribution caused by the use of local cook ovens and coal stoves. The third contributing factor to the smog was the unique geography of Donora. This background photo shows the unique geography of this dam, which enhanced the air entrapment in Donora. As you can see, Donora is spread around the river, and it's a valley that is created by 400-foot cliffs, which is poor topography for the dispersion of smokes and emissions. This means when emissions were released from the plant, the smokes had nowhere else to go, therefore creating heavily polluted air in a confined space for residents to breathe. So overall, all the effluents from the local cook ovens, coal stoves, the plants, and the temperature inversion lingered for 5 days within this geographical bowl, creating this massive environmental disaster. The Donora event inspired the public support for federal clean air legislation. In 1955, the U.S. Congress passed the Air Pollution Control Act, which provided funds to the Public Health Service to conduct research into the causes and control of air pollution. This act was strengthened by the Clean Air Acts of 1963, 1970, and 1990, which provided for enforcement of air emission standards and other means of control that have been credited with drastic improvements in the U.S. air quality and therefore public health. This slide gives an example of the levels of sulfur dioxide in Donora in 1948 relative to the current acceptable limits. In 1948, Donora had a toxic level of sulfur dioxide up to 1,500 micrograms. The acceptable limit of sulfur dioxide is only 80 micrograms today. So it really shows how toxic the levels and how high the toxins were in the air at the time of the smog. Unfortunately, the impact of Donora smog doesn't stop there. There's long-lasting impacts on humans' health, and they remain questionable until today. One study showed a consistently higher number of deaths than expected from cardiovascular diseases in the decades following the smog for those who reported having heart or respiratory disease in 1948 in Donora. Among men and women collectively, A total of 70 deaths from cardiovascular deaths were observed in Donora for those who had reported heart disease, asthma, pneumonia, or bronchitis in 1948. The same investigators assessed cancer death in Donora and Arsenal, Pennsylvania from 1948 to 1957. As you can see in the attached table to the slide, there was a statistically significantly higher proportion of cancer deaths in Donora compared to Arsenal. The data highlights the long-term impact of the smog. It is possible that the smog pollution by the Donora industrial plants that occurred in 1948 is still affecting environmental and public health even today. Air pollution today. In 2018, 70 years after the Donora disaster, air pollution remains to be a global threat to public health. Recent news articles have highlighted air pollution challenges that remain both within the United States and globally. A recent study of more than 60 million Americans demonstrated the higher exposure to air pollution was significantly associated with increased rates of all-cause mortality. In India, both household and outdoor exposure to particulate matter are significant health concerns. Air pollution has been estimated to be the cause of more than 100,000 premature deaths yearly in India alone. In summary, Donora, Pennsylvania was greatly impacted by the deadly smog event in 1948. The smog lasted about 5 days and killed approximately 20 people. About 1/3 of the population was affected by the smog. The smog was caused by the zinc melting plant, zinc works, and the emission containing substantial amounts of fluoride, sulfur compounds, and particulate matter, and the temperature inversion that trapped the smokes over the town. The Donora smog event was devastating to the community. However, this event helped create the Air Pollution Control Act in 1955 and further developed the Clean Air Acts. Higher cardiovascular deaths and cancer mortality rates among Donora residents who experienced the smog event in 1948 is suggestive of the smog's long-lasting impacts. The smog may have been an environmental disaster, but in the end it helped save more people from air pollution. Air pollution remains a challenge both within the United States and globally.